Welcome to episode 45 of What Happens Next, the podcast dedicated to helping you work out what you want next in the next chapter of your life. Now, I think that even though happiness is an emotion that's fleeting, we all want greater levels of well-being in our lives. And that's why the episode I'm going to share with you today, and interestingly, an episode that's one of our most popular on the What Happens Next YouTube channel, is all about happiness, but more importantly, the different elements of well-being that we can have as established thousands of years ago by the Greeks. That's hedonic well-being, eudaimonic well-being, and chaironic well-being. And what our amazing guest today, Jon Dunckley, explains is the difference between those elements and why we need all of them in our life. So without further ado, let me introduce Jon Dunckley and the insights he shares about thinking about well-being to help you live a life full of well-being in your next chapter. Part of the issue we've got when we're thinking about what happens next in our lives is having the self-awareness, having the introspection to be able to think about what the gaps in our well-being are. And we're doing loads of work at the minute with What Happens Next to build solutions that are going to help you think about well-being in a nuanced way when you're thinking about how it applies to your life. One of the first things we've built that you can use today is our What Happens Next quiz. It's free to do, takes about 5 minutes, but what it will do is give you an insight into the areas of strengths when it comes to your well-being and the areas you might want to improve. You can take the What Happens Next quiz at whathappensnext.life/quiz, and I hope it helps you in your journey to work out what happens next for you. Good morning and welcome to this episode of What Happens Next. Full disclosure, I was running late today because I was looking after my physical well-being. I was just finishing off my workout. And Russ, who's our producer on What Happens Next and on all of the stuff we do at Savello, was getting a little concerned, but I'm here and I'm on time, so it's all good. I'm really excited today to be having a conversation with Jon. But before we do that, I want to highlight some things we're doing with the What Happens Next project that I'd love for you to get involved with. Firstly, about 3 weeks ago, we launched a quiz. And that quiz is designed, if you're at that transition in your life and thinking about what happens next, to think about where your well-being is now in a range of areas. So not only financial, but physical. How clear are you on your purpose and values, social and community well-being? We know that kindness actually is a superpower in terms of making us feel good. So thinking about how much of that is in our lives. And work and intellectual, how do we make sure that if we're thinking about leaving that career we've had for X period of time, how do we make sure we maintain those challenges that we face at work that actually drive our well-being in a positive way and remove the stress? It's an interesting one because there's been some real insights for people completing the What Happens Next quiz. And I want to share a couple with you today. Firstly, what we're finding is that actually people's well-being at the 10 tends to be a 6 to 7. So well-being for the people who complete the quiz is pretty good. But there is a gap and there's some space. Interestingly, for the people who have completed the survey, and we've had about 85 complete the survey in the first couple of weeks. So I don't know whether it's large enough yet to be categorical, but it's an interesting start. The trend is that people are fairly high on work and financial well-being, but low in community and social. And I wonder whether that's a trend of that phase of our life when we are, at the top of our careers, but perhaps neglected other areas of well-being to focus on that. So I want to explore that. But we're not at a stage yet that we can be anywhere near categorical about the results. So I need your help. And what I'd like you to do, and if you're watching this on catch up, there'll be a QR code on this page that you can click and do the quiz. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, I'd ask Russ to put a link in the comments. Please complete the quiz and make sure that we get as wider understanding of the real challenges you're facing when you're thinking about what happens next in your life. So that was part one. Part two is YouTube. So we're really keen on delivering as much high quality content as possible to help you think about the challenges you face when you're thinking about what happens next in your life. We can do that better when people subscribe, because YouTube like it, we get to talk about it more and help more people, which is my mission with what happens next. So if you haven't yet, and we've had a flurry of subscribers because we sent an email out yesterday and people decided to help us with that. If you haven't subscribed to What Happens Next YouTube channel, and again, there'll be a link in the notes, please do subscribe because that helps us massively. Both of those things are free to do. Both of those things will take 10 minutes, but both of those things hopefully will, particularly with the quiz, will give you an insight into where you sit when you're thinking about your own situation, but also help us do more of the stuff to help people. So thanks in advance, and we look forward to delivering great content for What Happens Next. Today is no exception, though, because we're joined by Jon Dunckley. And Jon is somebody that I've heard speak a few times. Know that he's really focused on the area, thinking about well-being in a slightly different way to a lot of people in our sector, in the financial planning and services sector do. And that's why I was fascinated in having a conversation with him. But without further ado, let me introduce Jon. Jon, how's your week going?
Well, aside from the fact it's absolutely tipping down outside in the middle of a beautiful British summer, it's going all right. Thanks very much.
I moved to the seaside a couple of weeks ago. So we're in a new house. We moved about 3 weeks ago, and my wife Gazzy said to me, "You know what, Chris? It'd be brilliant moving this summer year because we're just in time for the summer." I'm yet to see that summer, but I'm hoping.
2 days ago, 3 weeks ago, that was summer. We're not getting any more. I was going to go out on the bike later on today, but it's pretty much waterlogged out there. So I think that's it. Down tools.
Yeah, I did a 103-mile bike ride a few weeks ago, and the clippy shoes in the water, you know, when you clip in and clip out, I think I must have fell in a puddle about 3 or 4 times. Not on that particular ride, but while training. It wasn't fun. Anyway, we can talk about bike riding and the weather. What I'd like to do as a start of 10 is hear more about you. So tell us a little bit about you.
Now, there's an interesting one. I was thinking about this the other week. When people say, "Tell me about you," the answers that you get from people are quite interesting because it cuts to what's most important to them, doesn't it? Where do I start? Do I start with how old I am, where I live, what I do for a living? What is it that kind of defines me as a person? So for me, I think first and foremost, who am I? I'm a husband and I'm a dad of 3. That is the kind of bedrock of me, if you like. Beyond that, I'm a strange mix, I guess. I'm a kind of part financial planner, part psychologist, massive geek. There's no denying that. I'm definitely a geek. I'm a founding director of the About Consulting Group, and for my sins, I'm a sometime triathlete as well, which cuts back to the bikes. But yeah, I think first and foremost, dad and husband. That's who I am.
I tell you what, I've been thinking about a lot. I've been thinking of, as part of what we're trying to do with What Happens Next, is about identity and what defines us, and particularly around value. So, what do you think you stand for? Well, what do you think? Like, if you had just 3 words to define who you are as a human, what you stand for, what would those 3 words be?
I think what's interesting is it's changed over time.
Yeah.
And it's definitely an evolving process. I think at the moment, probably my biggest value would be gratitude right now.
Yeah.
And that's something that's definitely grown over the last couple of years. I've been consciously practicing gratitude. Um, and there's lots of interesting research around the practice of gratitude and what it can give you. And perhaps we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But that's changed my outlook in a lot of other ways. So what else do I stand for? That gratitude, I think, leads to more around family. So, when I define myself as a husband and a father first and foremost, it's because I am incredibly grateful that I have that in my life. And so for me, it would be that kind of gratitude, family. And then thereafter, I mean, it's kind of pick one from three or four. But I think if I was going to go for the one that would probably most resonate and most sit in that third space, probably these days authenticity, which I know is a buzzword and I know everyone uses it, but what do I mean by that? Well, I lived a lot of my life as not the authentic me. I'm autistic and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 41. And now at 49, I've now had 8 years of developing an identity that makes more sense.
Yeah.
And so I kind of present more as who I really am. And I don't really care anymore if that doesn't chime with other people. Whereas for 41 years, I spent a lot of time masking and pretending to be someone else. So I think these days, the value for me of authenticity allows me to do what I do and not to have to constantly apologize, I think.
What's interesting about that? Certainly thinking about the work that we do at Cervello with clients, authenticity comes up quite a lot because they've felt the need in a corporate life to play a certain role.
Mm.
And I don't know whether that, and we're lucky that we don't, to a certain extent, have to play that role because, running our own businesses, we've got the freedom and autonomy to do what we want. And there's still a bit of expectation, isn't there? If I turn up naked to this interview, there's a minimum level of expectation.
I'll be honest, I'd be on my toes if that happened.
Exactly. But actually, part of the reason a lot of people want to change is they want to be more them.
Yes.
They want to be more them. And it's an interesting... It's an interesting shift that happens at a certain time in our lives, and for many of us, it's different, I think. But it's an interesting. What do you think shifted that perspective for you? Was it the diagnosis, or was it something else?
No, it's a number of things. I think age is definitely a part of it, but not so much necessarily my own age. I don't think. I think it relates more to my parents' age.
Yeah.
My dad was a Met police officer and did 30 years and was always very strong. He was like the kind of hero figure. But he's in his mid 70s now and he can't do all the things that he used to. And recently he had a nasty fall and had to have his whole shoulder reconstructed. And he was incredibly vulnerable at that point in time. My mum has got quite advanced dementia. And although she's only 70, it is getting quite bad now. And I think seeing them and seeing the change in them has caused me to be a little bit more introspective about my own place in life. They're only 21 to 24 years down the line from where I am right now. And it just brings, I think, to the front of your mind just how precious time is. And, we really, tomorrow's never guaranteed. And I think that's one of the reasons why I practice gratitude as much, because it's all very well looking for what comes next. But I think we've also got to look at what comes now.
How lucky we are now as well.
Yeah, and every day. I mean, it's raining outside, but I walk in the rain can be just as enjoyable as something else. And I think it's just that recognition that tomorrow's not guaranteed, and the older you get, the less guaranteed tomorrow is, and therefore the more precious today is.
Yeah.
And when you're in your 20s, you don't give any thought to any of that. It's all about thinking about decades and decades, and then you start looking down the barrel of 50, and you think, actually, now is the time to really enjoy this because I don't know how long I'll have.
And I think you're right. I think if somebody's watching this, the likelihood is they're one of the most lucky people on the planet.
Yeah.
So thinking about how lucky you are, and it's I always both struggle and think about this quite a lot. And it again, I'm lucky to be able to think about this sort of stuff. How much time do I spend focusing on the future when actually I should just be enjoying what I've got? And that push pull of
Yeah.
going, well, actually, I've got more to do and I want to give more and help more and have more conversations and plan more for the future. But actually, am I doing that by sacrificing today? And I think that's as a
And,
challenge.
we do that a lot, and I think that that when you look at the benefits of mindfulness and just being more present in the moment, the research is absolutely clear that it is good for us. It's good for our health. It's good for our physical and our mental health. And just recognize. Johnny Wilkinson's a fascinating guy to listen to on this subject. He's really got into the whole mindfulness area, and he talks about taking the kick that won the drop kick that won the World Cup for England in rugby, and he said he was happy afterwards for about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But now he gets as much joy from doing the washing up, he says, as he gets from taking that kick, because it's magic and all of me in every moment. And if I enjoy every moment and I accept it for what it is, and I can accept whatever feelings I'm having, I can accept whatever's going on around me, and I don't make judgments about it, I can just accept it for what it is. It's never to play down the troubles that people have. And I think it's quite important that we get that out on the table. When I'm talking about psychology and positive psychology, which is really kind of close to my heart, I'm never saying you don't have troubles in your life, just positive mindset and you'll be fine. That's not what it's all about. And there's a big seam of positive psychology that talks about the dark side. But actually, even from that, you can take things. So the whole concept of post-traumatic growth, and how when people have suffered severe health issues, very often they have a greater appreciation for life afterwards, and they really benefit from that. So I think it's just recognizing the moment and living as much as you can in the moment is really powerful. And I'm always minded that the brain is an incredibly powerful thing, and it's a very complex thing, but it's also quite simplistic. You've got a spam filter in that brain. Every moment around you, there's about 11 million items of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sight, sound, smells, whatever. Every day, each one of us is confronted with more data than people 200 or 300 years ago would have had in a lifetime. I mean, that's terrifying, right? So your brain filters out most of it automatically. If you concentrate on the here and now and you concentrate on gratitude, what you're doing is telling your brain, let that through the spam filter. That's things I'm interested in. And then it will look actively for things that are good in your life.
We will get on to the questions that I said I was going to ask you, but there's a couple of things on that. That's is it called the reticular activating system that does that?
That plays into it. Yeah.
Like that, isn't it? So I've got I've got a journaling and gratitude practice that I do every morning. I'm not always consistent with it, and actually I need to get back into it because I haven't done it for a few days now. But I do a meditation, breathing, and then journaling in the morning. I've found that if I haven't got a consistent habit to do that, I won't do it.
Yeah.
So how much of that, your gratitude practice and what you've read about what the science says, is it important to be habitual about it, and how do you include that in your life?
Yeah, so there's different research. Some saying you do it daily, some saying do it weekly, but do it, I think, is the bottom line. So make that a conscious thing and an ongoing basis. If you do it for a period of time, there will be an ongoing benefit, but that benefit will taper off. So you need to kind of go back to it. It doesn't need to be every single day. It might be that you do it every few days and there's lots of different ways of doing it. The gratitude diary is one of them, but there's also things like writing letters to people that you're grateful for something that they've done, even if you don't send it. That's the interesting bit. Even if you don't send it, the action of going through that process of saying, I'm really grateful to you for what you've done for me, and getting it out on paper, yield benefits.
You know what's interesting? I think I might have shared this on LinkedIn. I had a great voice note from a cousin that I haven't seen for a while. And I've got a cousin that I'm closer with who bought a bunch of copies of my book about kindness and shared it. And I mean, that book came out 2.5 years ago now, so it's not new. He just left a little voice note saying, "I'm really grateful for what you're writing and some of the practices I wrote about it. I'm now adopting in my life." Now, yes, if you don't feel socially comfortable sharing it, don't. But actually, what's the downside if you're just saying thank you? You know,
Yeah.
that element of just turning, because I didn't turn around and go, how rude. I turned around and went, that made my day.
Exactly that. It's lifted you, but it's also lifted the other person as well.
Yeah.
So there are no losers in that situation.
And it's a ripple effect, isn't it? You know, it's a ripple effect because hopefully I'm going to do something good as well. Talk to me a little bit about your work then. Like we talked about you as a dad, and you know, there's things you like to do. Talk to me about work.
So a lot of it stems from my kind of background and not fitting into a traditional workplace. If I'm honest, I was a financial planner out of university. 21 years old, I became a financial advisor. Went through that, became head of technical services for 3 different insurance companies in this country and in Dublin. I've been an investment specialist, a pension specialist. I've done the whole raft of it, but I wasn't really happy in that kind of environment. And after the 3rd time I got made redundant, because financial services, I got to the point of thinking, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to go out on my own. And I set up a little training company, and it was just for me to do what I liked doing. I took a couple of clients with me from the firm that had just made me redundant because they weren't going to do it anymore. So great, I took those clients with me. And over the time, we've now built up 4 strands to the business. So we've got about financial, which is financial services, training and consulting. We do thought leadership, SME input into projects, that kind of stuff. I recently wrote a paper for the Equity Release Council on the kind of future direction of equity release in the country. We've got about safeguarding, which my wife set up. She's a head teacher. And we've got a team of people there that run safeguarding training, investigations, audits, and whatnot in schools and colleges. So anything to do with the safeguarding of children, we cover through that part of the business. We've got about peak performance, which is broadly a kind of positive psychology type venture. If I'm going to distill it, it's really, I set that up because I wanted people to lose the Sunday night dread. I'd say it's about how can we make organizations and individuals happier and more productive in what they're doing. And then the final one is about neurodiversity, which is just a not-for-profit promoting the benefits of a more neurodiverse workplace, which comes from the fact that, as I mentioned, I didn't benefit from that. The workplaces I worked in didn't help me at all. And my wife is also dyslexic, so we thought, we'll combine our resources there and we'll set up something to try and promote that. So now we've got the 4 strands of the business, and we've been running them very merrily together. And now my wife's gone and taken on a new school as head teacher, because that's what she does. When a school's failing and it's in trouble, she'll go in and fix it. So now I'm running all of them, but thankfully I do have a good team of people as well.
Great. No, love that. Now, the interview you're listening to today is also available to watch on our YouTube channel. If you'd like more content, exclusive content that's not available on the podcast, you can visit at What Happens Next Life. And whilst you're there, I want to ask you a favour. We want to help as many people as possible navigate, if they're in their 50s and 60s, what's going to happen next in their lives. The easiest and freest way you can do it is subscribe to our YouTube channel. So today, I'd love for you to do that. Thank you. And the bit I want to talk about first is that element of positive psychology, because I'm an amateur fan of positive psychology. Actually, once I've done my certified financial planner qualification this year, I'm going back to school and probably similar to you, going to follow the positive psychology route as opposed to doing any more financial planning. I don't think there's anyone doing it. I mean, there always is, but and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you talked about that Sunday night dread, and where people were, and often brand new clients, we're having the conversation about Sunday night dread because that's often part of the reason they want financial clarity to say, can I afford to make change?
Exactly that.
We know it's about more than that, which is why we've done What Happens Next. What lessons do you think can positive psychology teach us about managing change, thinking about transition, and looking about what happens next in our lives?
So the notion of positive psychology, for those who are perhaps not so familiar with it, if you regard traditional psychology as helping people to go from -5 to 0, it's about finding the areas where perhaps things are not going well in your life and trying to find a way around those. Positive psychology is about helping people effectively go from 0 to +5.
Yeah.
What is it that the happiest people in the world, the people who are flourishing, what is it that they're doing that we're perhaps not doing, and how can we integrate some of that into our lives? And there's lots of things that come under that. So gratitude would be a part of it, mindfulness would be a part of it, using your strengths would be a part of it, and that's something I'm absolutely fascinated by, and perhaps we could talk about a little bit later on. Finding meaning in life is a big part of it. And just basically finding more opportunities for positive emotions, in a broader sense, and optimism as well. I'm an endlessly optimistic person. I mean, I'm one of if the house is burning down around me, I will still believe that I can rebuild it, and it'll be a nicer house at the end of it. And that's kind of my approach to life. So how can that play into what happens next and being at a crossroads? I think for me, it comes down to asking yourself some questions. And one of those questions would be, when I felt at my best, when I felt really content, I felt like things were going well, what was I doing?
Yeah.
And that will tell you a lot about the things that are really important to you in life. What was it that gave me that feeling? Why did I feel so good at that point in time? And how can I break that down to think about what that means? Equally, looking at things like my strengths. So a strength is something that I would define as being something that you're good at and something that you enjoy doing as well. Now,
Yeah.
quite often we mistake things that we're good at for being a strength, right? But that's not always the case. If you're doing something at work, you might be very good at it. It makes you miserable. That's not a strength. So if I'm good at it and it energizes me, it makes me feel good, that's a strength. Right?
Yeah.
And there's various profilers you can use to look at those kinds of things. But how can I use my strengths in my next phase of life? Now, that might be that I have a strength of, so my top strength comes out on those things as writing. So how can I use that writing to make my world a better place and maybe make other people's world a better place as well? And at crossroads, how can that take me somewhere? Um, and then the final piece, I guess, is what gets me out of bed when I don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And all of those different pieces will kind of combine to saying, well, this is who I really am. And that's how I can use that to be happier in the next phase of my life. And if I combine that with being more grateful for where I am, being more mindful of the moment that I'm in, the chances are I'm going to end up in a pretty decent place at the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, it's an interesting one. I went traveling in 2022 with my daughter, who's 20 now. But she was just going to uni at the time, and during the summer we went traveling. And one of the books that I was reading while I was away was Martin Siegelman's book. I'm sure I pronounced his name wrong, Thrive. And actually, that change in perspective in terms of psychology, talking about how to fix, I mean, we're all broken, but how to fix broken people versus how do we flourish? I'm sorry, not thrive, flourish.
Yeah.
That element is actually something worth exploring. But it's interesting because I think about when I'm most satisfied, and some of the occasions are at rest, but often it involves me doing something that's a bit more challenging.
Yes.
So how do we square that circle of making sure that we're thinking about this? Because I imagine it's a jigsaw, right? There's bits where we're really happy when we're with family and just sitting around the table. silly jokes. And there's also how do we build that jigsaw of a life well lived?
I think it is. You're absolutely right. It's a jigsaw. That there are parts to it. So sometimes, I always my birthday every year, right? 5th of November, my birthday. I will go off to a coffee shop with a book,
Yeah,
and I'll sit in the coffee shop all day, drinking coffee, eating cake, and I'm as happy as Larry. Right?
yeah,
Costs me nothing really. 10, 15 quid over the course of the day. It's not massively exciting, but it's what I enjoy doing, and I get tremendous pleasure from that. So on the one side, that is a part of who I am, and I can get a lot from it. But then what you're describing there is something that very often we talk about in terms of flow. Right?
yeah,
So the concept of flow, lots of people will be familiar with it. It's from a psychologist called Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. Right? That's an easy one to usual, usual spelling. Yeah, usual spelling. Um, and basically, what the concept of flow is, where it's almost like the Goldilocks amount of difficulty, right? So if you're doing something that is really easy, you become very bored very quickly, right?
yeah,
If you're doing something that is really far too difficult, you become very frustrated, and it becomes, it's quite stressful. But if you're doing something that is stretching you just to the right limits of your own ability, right? And that could be anything. It could be that you've taken on a new project. I went a little while ago, my son bought me a experience day to go and make a knife at a forge, right? So I went to a forge with a proper blacksmith, and I took a piece of metal and I turned it into a knife by the end of the day, right? Now I was stretched just to the limit of how,
yeah,
it wasn't so difficult because they were there to help me. But what happens when you're stretched that way is that time disappears.
yeah,
You find that what you think's an hour has actually been 5 or 6 hours. And what's really fascinating by that is when you look at the research, very often those flow moments, which are generally accepted as being enjoyable and positive and things that we should strive for, those very often come when we're actually engaged in some form of work.
yeah, yeah,
So when we stop work completely and we don't replace it with anything else, we're liable to lose some of those flow opportunities. So it's a matter of thinking in terms of those jigsaw pieces. Yeah, I can have the sitting in the coffee shop with my friends. Those are easy. But how can I find my own flow opportunities to still stretch myself, to still try and put myself into a place where I am having to think and I am having to take on a challenge?
yeah.
Because by doing that, I'm likely to experience flow, and experiencing flow is likely to give me a greater sense of well-being.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and that element of finding your new thing, or finding what fits into the jigsaw, is a really good book. Funny enough, I was speaking at an event yesterday where I was talking about this. The book that really helped me work out tips and techniques about how we might do this is a book called Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett, and it talks about two concepts that I really love. Firstly, because it's all about applying design thinking to your life as opposed to just to like design thinking they use in industry a lot.
Yeah.
Um, First element I really like is the bit of low cost experimentation. So clearly you're not going to go and become a professional full-time knife builder, but
No.
that experience day allows you to go, oh, that might be something that I might be interested in doing. And
Exactly
that
that.
and that step of what happens next is like just try stuff, like give it a go for a day and see how you get on.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And what have you got to lose in that? I'm just trying to see. I had it down here. Doesn't matter. It was in the drawer. But yeah, it was saying, well, okay, that's something that I fancy having a go at. I went up in an aeroplane with a friend of mine,
yeah,
right? Um, he's a private pilot. And he said, well, come up in the plane with me. And I thought, well, if I get up there, I might get the bug for this, and I might want to learn to fly. As it happened, I got up there. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It was all right. It was quite
yeah,
enjoyable. It's not something I ever want to do again,
yeah,
but it was
yeah,
something different to try. And you're absolutely right. Try different things. And, you know,
but, but the
I
other
was like that with sport with my kids. I wanted my kids to try all the sports they could try, because then they'll find the one that is their love. And they
yeah,
all did.
yeah, it's about what works for you, isn't it? And then the other element that Bill Burnett shares in the book that I love is the 3 playing cards question. So what does a life that gives you all the satisfaction in the world look like, and how would you spend your time, is question one. Actually, that's a pretty standard question that a lot of people consider. The other two, I think, are more powerful. If you didn't have the resources to live the life you want, but you just continue to be fairly happy, what would that look like?
Yeah.
It's about gratitude for what we've got and how we live our lives. The one that I really love is question three, which is the Joker question. If you had all the money in the world, and this is the important bit, you knew nobody would laugh at your choices, what would you do?
Yeah.
And I love that removes the social, what we were talking about, social expectations having an influence on what we do. What if we remove those social expectations? I really like that combination of questions. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
What's interesting there, I think, though, is that the notion that when we're taking those first two playing cards, and what is it that makes you really happy? I don't think necessarily most people are in a position to answer that, because when they think about what makes them happy, very often what they're thinking about is the having and the doing. And I'm happy when I can go on lots of holidays, or I'm happy when I can drive a nicer car. And yes, that is part of it, but it's only part of it. And I think if you don't have that broader concept of what really makes you happy, you're liable to potentially go down the wrong pathway with those cards.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. But what the cards are designed to do is just give you that different perspective.
Yeah.
I think all of these conversations are about layers, aren't they? I'm thinking about this in a different way. I'm with you that being actually is the bit that a lot of people miss, and that's why gratitude and meditation and all of those practices are really important. Talk to me about retirement. How do you think about it? The more that I think about it, the more I think it's a concept designed for the industrial age that is probably a bit flawed. But that's just my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think retirement. I used to advise a lot of people towards retirement, and very often they'd have an idea of when they want to retire and how much money they want to have in retirement. And my question was always why.
Yeah.
Why is it that? What is it that's going to give you? What are you going to replace it with? Because work, and we just said, work is such an important part of our life, and you get the flow experiences, and that it's central to your life for decades, and then you take it away. Do you remember the film About a Boy with Hugh Grant? Right? So the notion of that film, for people who haven't seen it, is that this guy, his dad wrote a Christmas #1, and these songs, if you get a Christmas #1 hit every year, you're going to get money for the rest of forever.
Yeah.
Right? But he's got enough money never to need to work, and he's in his 30s, and he doesn't have to work a day. And he talks about having to break the day up into units of time, like go in and get a haircut 1 unit of time, because you've got to find things to fill your day with. That to me is quite a horrible thought, that notion. And I've spoken to my dad about this. When my dad retired at 55 from the police, and that was always great, I can't wait to retire. He was back at work by 56 because he was bored and he didn't have that sense of purpose. So I think retirement for me was always about options. And I think that is a different way of thinking about it. If you've got the ability to wake up on any given day and decide what you want to do on that day, that it should be the goal of retirement for me. Now, will I ever stop work completely? Not while I have the ability to keep working. I love what I do, right? But if I want to say I'm not going to work at all for the next month, and I'm going to go off and travel a little bit, I want to be able to do that as well. So I think retirement is about choices. But I look at some of the research, and I've had to write this guy's name down because I can never remember it. But there was an interesting study by a guy called Chen Kai Wu, right? Quoted in the Harvard Business Review. And he looked at the longevity benefits of delaying retirement, right? So he looked at people who retired at 65, and then people who delayed it to 66. And what he found was an 11% increase in in life, 11% decrease in morbidity for those people who delayed retirement. And even those people,
if they carried on working for longer.
Yeah, and even people who were poorly, there was still a 9% improvement by working longer. Now, correlation and causation is not saying that if you keep working, you're going to live longer. But there's a something there, and the other researchers has found the same thing. And I wonder whether, and this is only my own thinking on it, I'd love to see some more research, but I wonder whether there's a part in there that says there's purpose. We know that if you stop work completely and you don't replace it with anything else, that your brain slows down, you're not exercising it as much, and it's not a muscle. People say it's a muscle. It's not, but think of it in that way. The more you exercise the brain, the stronger it stays. Yeah. If you're not working anymore and you're not doing anything else, well, there's only so much this morning and loose women that you can stand before, the brain gives up. But purpose is also part of that in my mind, because you've got the purpose of getting up and going to work and doing all those things. So I think the long answer to your short question is retirement is still valid, but retirement is going to look different for everybody. And I think there's a greater role of purpose. Now, in terms of, you've mentioned a book, so I'm going to throw one into the mix now. A fascinating book called The 100-Year Life.
Yeah.
And this talks about, as we're increasingly extending life expectancy, and be mindful, over the last 25 to 30 years, life expectancy has gone up by 7%.
Yeah.
That's massive, right?
Marginally more for people who carry on working longer.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, and I think we should also be mindful of this, is actually healthy life expectancy has gone backwards by 2% over the similar time period. So we're living longer, but not necessarily in as great health. And we should be mindful of that. But this talks about, potentially having more phases to retirement. So the notion that we go from in our perhaps 40s and 50s, throwing ourselves completely into work and maximizing our earnings potential, to then backing out and maybe going part-time or taking a less stressful job and easing into retirement. So maybe I go 2 days a week because it still keeps me busy. The other 3 days a week, I do community work or whatever else it is that I find pleasurable. And that still keeps my purpose and it still keeps me active and might just improve in my life expectancy at the same time.
Yeah, but I like that idea of if we know that we've got longer. I mean, it's one interesting point there, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot, and certainly it's now part of a conversation I have with clients more often. Is life expectancy and health span are fundamentally different concepts, and actually it brings us back to the point that you made earlier on, which is, what are you doing today? If you've got this pot of money, what are you doing to do things immediately that are going to make you happier? And look, I'm a fan of the concept of delayed gratification, but it gets to a point where they go, what's the purpose of the money you've accumulated?
100%. I had a client of mine who was in his mid-70s, still working full-time as a solicitor.
Yeah.
I was looking after, at the time, about £400,000-500,000 of his money, and I wasn't looking after all of it, right? But he had no family, no one to leave his money to, was still working full-time, and his will intended to leave everything to his boss.
Right.
And in the end, I said to him, I'm going to put you on a slightly different regime. He said, well, what's that? I'm going to put you on a spending regime.
Yeah.
I want you to spend some money. I can promise you, you're not going to run out of money, right? There's no chance of you running out of money. So I want you to spend money. And he would phone me up, and we had a completely different relationship as planner and client. He would phone me up and go, John, I need you to tell me it's all right. I go, what's all right? He go, I need you to tell me it's okay that I spend £5,000 on this. Like 100% it's okay. Go and spend it, enjoy it, phone me back and tell me how much you enjoyed it.
It's interesting though. I mean, I suppose the element there is that how much of that continued work was about purpose, meaning, intellectual capacity, and I suppose when I think we talked about this earlier on. There's getting the balance right, but balance is never perfect. So you're always
And
trying to.
there's no problem with him working. I mean, he was enjoying his work, and I would never have told him to jack his work in. But equally, I would go around to see him, and he would put one ring on the gas stove in the kitchen rather than put the heating on. And I'm saying, no, live your life. One day he phoned me up and said, "You'll be so proud of me, John." I said, "Well, why? What have you done?" He said, "I went out to dinner with a lady the other day and I paid." Oh, good, well done. But it was just nice, you know.
I've got a few clients like that. I think what we underestimate is the habits that got them to that level of wealth are really difficult to shift, aren't they? So it's we've lived our life to say what is really important to accumulate it. I think some of the value we have
go over the crest of the hill at some point. There's another client of mine that I did a similar thing for. She had so much money, but she was absolutely terrified she'd run out. And it was her greatest fear in the world that she'd run out. So we ended up putting quite a big chunk of money into an annuity. And it was just purchase life annuity. It's not a pension annuity, but just exchanging a lump sum of money for an ongoing income for the rest of her life. So then she knew it could never run out. And that gave her the confidence to then spend some of her other money because she knew that income could not run out.
But this is the interesting thing. My experience of running a practice over the last 14 years is a lot more of my conversations now, and this is because probably I've evolved and continue to evolve, but a lot of my conversations now are about how we think, feel, behave. They're live conversations, not money conversations.
Yes.
Actually, I think that one of the things, and I don't know whether you've probably got more of an insight about what the profession's doing than me, because you get to see more advisors. But my perception is there's a slow movement in having deeper conversations, which people watching this will need. It's just having that.
Yeah, I think, I'm also mindful of the rise of AI. And this is something I've been taking around the country and talking to lots of advisors about, that for me, the future of the financial planning profession is about deeper client relationships and understanding people. I'll give you a great example of that, right? That I recently got an invoice from a client. I opened it up and her branding is a kind of shade of red, right? And I opened it up and I felt my heart start to accelerate, because I grew up in a family where red final demands were right? Always getting red bills, and there was always stress around that. So I actually experienced a physical reaction just to the color of that invoice, because that's my money history. Right? Now, that's something AI can't pick up on, but understanding why I am the way I am with money is a really important part of the relationship between me and my financial planner.
100%. 100%. How do we react to this sort of stuff? What did we learn as kids, and how does that impact our lifestyle now? I tell you what's interesting. And when I was doing the research and to the questions for this interview, I got really fascinated in the phrase peak performance, because I'd imagine peak performance for somebody like me, if I look at like my fitness, I don't do triathlons. I do one event at a time. It's going to be different to somebody like you, who's out there doing a lot more. How do we define peak performance in our own lives, and what's the starting point to think about what that means to us? And just give me a bit of an insight in terms of why you chose that as the thing to aim for.
Yeah, I went through quite a deep thought process when we were coming up with a name for that part of the business. And I was mindful that a lot of people do associate peak performance with kind of, the athletes at the very top of their game and that kind of, and I don't see it that way. I see peak performance as being entirely individual. It's what is your optimal state of functioning. Right? And that will be unique to you. So it may well be that for some people, simply being able to get up and go about their daily business and not feeling like, that it's all too much and the world's coming in on them, that is their world of peak performance. It's about and it's organizationally and individually, it's about operating in a way that allows you to perhaps use your strengths to be able to maximize your own happiness in whatever it is that you are energized by, and also the flow state that we talked about earlier on. How do you maximize your own opportunities for those flow state moments? And for me, that's peak performance. So, I love triathlon. I've done multiple Ironman triathlons. I've got one in 6 weeks' time. I will not ever win a triathlon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. It's not my goal. It's not what I'm there for. In fact, very often when I get to the run stage of an Ironman, is I've got to do a marathon, I'll walk quite a lot of it, not because I have to, but because I want to, because I want to soak in the moment and I want to experience the whole thing.
This is the interesting thing, isn't it? And I love that definition of peak performance as doing the best for you. I think that's a. But I've had a couple of marathon experiences that have been really interesting. I did Paris in 2017, and I've absolutely loved it. Remember getting to about mile 15, and it wasn't quick. It was just over 5 hours. It wasn't quick by any stretch of the imagination. I remember Cassie phoning me, and she was at the Eiffel Tower at mile 17, and she went, "Are you coming round anytime soon?" I went, "I'm getting there, but I'm not. I'm just taking my time, I'm enjoying it and stuff like that." She went, "No rush, but there's a man with a giant Eiffel Tower on his head that's just run past, and he's quicker than you." And I thought that was amazing. But then when I was training for London, and I did London in 2020, the virtual one, and then 2021, the charity that I was running for, I had a sports psychologist come in, and he said during that training process, similar to what you were talking about, peak performance, during that training process, actually, don't worry about time so much. Worry about how it feels, and worry about that element of what does it mean to you. And I actually think, you know what it's like when you sort of do this sort of stuff. People go, "What time did you get?" But actually reframing it so that it's your best, I think, is an important.
Absolutely right. The first bit of running advice I ever got was from a friend of mine who he's a great runner. He's a sub 3 hour marathoner, so he's a good runner. But his advice was, if you want to go further, go slower. And I think there's a real metaphor for life in that. You want to go further, slow it down.
Well, but that leads back to everything we talked about meditation and mindfulness and thinking about that, sort of what life means to us. Now, one of the things that I wanted to speak to you about is that definition of happiness, because I think we often have a perception of happiness as just lying on the beach with a cocktail or whatever it may be, that hedonic relationship. But I know that you think about it in a slightly different way. Do you want to explain a little bit about how we could think about happiness in terms of in terms of alternative definitions and the insights the sort of the ancient Greeks, Romans?
Yeah. And it's the Greeks that kind of led the way on a lot of this. I think the first thing to say, hedonic happiness is happiness, right? Let's get that out there. Having nice stuff, doing nice stuff, that will make you happy, right? But it's more of a transient happiness.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're thinking about the sort of notion of hedonia, it's about the kind of the having, the doing, the pleasure. And I think that's probably a good word to think about hedonic happiness. It's about pleasure, right? And pleasure is pleasant. The clue's in the title. So we shouldn't dismiss that, right? But we can go beyond that. What we know is that people get onto, and it's the old thing of the hedonic treadmill, right? Yes. So I feel good if I go on a nice holiday, but as soon as I get back, I'm now thinking, oh, I'm miserable. I want to go on the next one. And the best example I give you of that, I love cycling, right? But cycling got ruined for me when I started going to Mallorca to cycle. Because you go to Mallorca, you cycle in the mountains in the sunshine for a fortnight, you come back and it's absolutely tipping down with rain, and you're in Northamptonshire. It isn't the same thing. Right? So it kind of ruins the experience to an extent. And we know that lottery winners very often end up quite miserable in the long term because they think that winning the lottery will solve all their problems. But actually, once you've bought the bigger house, the nicer car, what's next? And that's where the other forms of happiness come in. So hedonic happiness has its place, and we should definitely be looking to to do things that we enjoy. And I would say, though, it's not about necessarily just spending money. The example I gave you of sitting in the coffee shop and reading a book, that is hedonic happiness. That is a pleasant experience, right? And so pleasure comes from that, whatever gives you pleasure. But the others, you've then got a form of happiness called eudaimonic happiness, which is kind of Aristotelian in origin. And Aristotle basically said that eudaimonic happiness is our kind of highest point of functioning. It's having a sense of purpose. It's the things that we were talking about earlier on. It's that the things that give us the reason to keep going. And if we were saying that pleasure was hedonia, eudaimonia is satisfaction, right? Now, Mick Jagger will tell you it's difficult to get satisfaction, but it's worth having it if you can get it, right? So the notion that we can have pleasure on the one side, but we can have satisfaction. And sometimes I would say the happiest times of my life have been when I just felt completely satisfied. I remember one time driving down the road, the sun was shining. I just finished a bike ride. I was going to pick my kids up and we were going to spend the weekend together. And I was completely satisfied with my life. At that moment, I was sat on the M1. That is not the most hedonic moment I'll ever experience, but I was really happy. So you've got that kind of eudaimonic happiness, having purpose, having a reason, right? But then you get to the third one, and the third one I think is quite interesting, and that's again, it's a Greek term, chaironic happiness, right? And that comes from the Greek for grace. And this is kind of the spirituality, and it's having a connection to something bigger than ourselves. It's that moment of kind of feeling spiritual joy, or lots of religious people will feel that when they go to worship in whatever way they choose to worship. In my own way, I'm not religious at all, but I've experienced that when I've been at music festivals. I remember seeing Faithless had trance music, and I was in a field with 40,000 people listening to this music, and I was lifted out of myself, and I felt this kind of, it was the closest I think I'll ever get to spirituality.
Was it? That is an absolute bagger, isn't it? I mean, that is like
Insomnia, God as a DJ, all that. It was just incredible, and it was an amazing experience. But so that one, if you like, would be peace. So you've got the notion of pleasure, the hedonia. You've got satisfaction, which is the eudaimonia, and then the chaeronia is peace. And those three elements make up our overall happiness. It's not enough to just have one of them. If you have your religion, but you don't have enough resources to be able to function, you're not going to be happy. Right?
Yeah.
You don't need to have a huge amount to be okay. Yeah. The happiest person that I know has very, very little, but she's got enough to feed herself and heat the house and whatnot. And so that's enough. But if you can tick all three of those boxes, you've got that opportunity for pleasure, you've got the opportunity to have satisfaction, and then you've got some kind of peace in your life, you're in pretty good shape.
This is the interesting thing, because I'm in the same boat as you. I'm not religious, but actually it took me a while to mentally get to the point where I was like, well, spirituality doesn't need to be religious. I'm a science guy, so like actually anything, and I probably, because of that definition of it, you turn around and go, well, that's not for me. But again, I know people who are religious, immense satisfaction from church, from attending. But I look at that and say, yes, you've got that belief in something bigger, but as a humanist and somebody believes in, positive human qualities, actually, that's bigger than me. That's an element that's bigger than me. I think the interesting thing, and the other thing and there's a great book about this by a philosopher called Alan de Botton, called Religion for Atheists. And he talks about the concept of atheism being really critical of religion, but actually there's certain things we can learn. And the element that he talks about, and he talks about fantastic art and culture and music that religion and belief has created. The one that he came down to was that element of community. It's that element of like having a people who, and that in its nature is Chaironic, because that's bigger than you, isn't it? It's not only
Absolutely right.
everybody.
And there's evolutionary value in that if you think about it. Our ancestors were doomed to die if they were cast out by the group. And that's why we are such social beings. I'm going to throw another book into the mix, a great book called The Good Life, which is based on one of the longest ongoing research studies in the world.
Based on the 70s sitcom, no?
No, sadly not. Although it could be. But this basically it's an ongoing research study in America on happiness.
Yeah.
And basically that they've been following people since the 1920s. So they followed them and they interviewed them every year. And then as they started to die, they started to interview their children, their grandchildren, and they followed it all the way through. And to summarize where they've got to in one sentence, what they found is that the biggest contributing element of happiness is connection.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing more powerful than just having connection to other people. So you're absolutely right. And we lose a lot of that, I think, in modern society. We don't have as tightly knit communities that we live in. And a lot of people that do have faith and do go to worship have a replacement for that. They've got that community. They are very much part of that group of people. So I guess if you can find that in another place, it might be, your sports club, it might be in a community group that you participate in, you can still get some of that spirituality and that inner peace from contributing in a different way.
100%. I've only asked about half the questions I was going to, Jon, to be honest, but we might have to have you back to ask the other lot. But what we're interested in is finding out about the work you do in terms of neurodiversity and thinking about how we can be better, encouraging people who are neurodiverse and be more supportive as a community, as employers, in our day-to-day lives. But also, what do you think we've learned as well? Because I think I'm like you, I'm a bit of a natural optimist, and maybe you'll tell me we haven't evolved as a society to be better at this sort of stuff. But number one, what do you think we could do more of to make sure that we're encouraging people who are neurodiverse to have, into our worlds, but also what do you think's improved?
Okay, so I think there is a movement, and there's a lot of people like myself who in the past, I wasn't diagnosed until relatively late, but in the past it would have been something that you tended to keep to yourself once you had been diagnosed. Not anymore. I'm kind of loud and proud. I am autistic, and I as a result of that, I am really, really good at certain things. The flip side is I'm really, really bad at other things. Right? So my strengths are exaggerated and my weaknesses are exaggerated. Now, what we've tended to do in the world up until now is expect everybody to do a bit of everything. And I think what we're starting to get to now is a recognition that not just in terms of neurodiversity, but in terms of the broader population anyway. Well, I mentioned strengths earlier on. We know now that you can't turn a weakness into a strength.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can use a strength to neutralize your weakness and to make it irrelevant. So I think what we can do going forward, and what we're starting to do now, is to recognise that, and to use a football analogy on the eve of the England semi-final, if Gareth Southgate went out and just played 11 goalkeepers, which I wouldn't put past him based on the way that he's been setting up the team, but if he put 11 goalkeepers out on the field, we're not going to do particularly well, right? What you need is your central midfielders, you need your strikers, you need your defensive wings. That mix of different ability creates something special. And diversity of thought is exactly the same thing. If we have people who think the same, you'll get one answer. If you have people who think differently, you'll get multiple answers. And those people that are trying it in their business are finding improvements in their results from that diversity of thought. So it's starting to get some momentum. We just need to keep it going.
Yeah, I love that. Where can people find out a bit more about you and the work you do?
So our group website is aboutconsulting.co.uk, all one word, about consulting. And from there, you can link to our other websites, or you can look me up on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much today, Jon. And
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
if you're watching on catch up and you're watching live, I hope you really got some benefit out of Jon and I's conversation. I know I did, and I'll be rewatching to learn loads. Thank you for joining us on another amazing What Happens Next, and we'll see you next time. So I learnt so much from Jon during this interview. I really enjoyed the understanding of chaironic happiness, chaironic well-being, particularly from somebody who's not particularly spiritual. But the description that Jon made about standing in that field, listening to a concert, really spoke to me. I'm interested in what spoke to you, so feel free to get in touch and let us know what particular part of this podcast you really loved. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you next week for episode 46.